On today's episode of Let's Find a Niche, we have Soren. Soren is one of the earliest green tome mages we had in the game with a respectable stat line of 33 attack and speed and workable res at 29. However, nowadays it's kind of outdated, and partially due to the fact that we keep getting green tome units that offer better stat lines or better utility. And just recently we just got Luthier, who not only has more attack and speed at base, but also more resistance and more HP. Oh, and overall he's just a much better investment, especially now that he's going to be a 3 and 4 star unit in the near future. But nonetheless, Soren can still hold his own. Assuming he were to get max merges and max flowers, his mediocre stat line would actually look really solid for the most part, sitting at 41 attack and speed with a resistance stat of 36, meaning he could realistically go into any kind of role. For example, for Aether Raids purposes, he could go into all types of enemy phase roles. For the first build, we have Plug-in, Torch, Noontime, Close Foil, Null Follow-Up, Pulse Smoke, and Attack Speed Solo. If you've been around the area lately, you would have noticed that Morgan got a Plug-in Torch refine essentially, with more stats. This is essentially a kind of a carbon copy variant where you'll want to run something that increases your overall bulk. You'll want to invest into as much speed as you possibly can, because that's what the weapon benefits from the most, since it already grants a good amount of attack, defense, and resistance. So the close foil is there to give you an additional attack and defense buff, null follow-up so you can naturally outspeed and disable follow-up attacks or anything of the sort, pulse smoke because that's a standard in Aether Raids, and attack speed solo for more attack and speed. It doesn't really matter which season you run any of these builds on, to be honest. Preferably, I chose light for plug-in because of Tamari Air, but you could also go on Astra and run a Tamari Tethys if you want to. No real preference, to be honest, but I prefer light for plug-in. And then for Astra, we have a Midi Blooms, Noontime, Mirror Stance 3, Null Counter Disrupt 3, Attack Smoke, and Speed Res Solo. This is just another means of taking advantage of his resistance stat, which is not that bad all things considered. And Midi Bloom's debuffing the foe for attack and resistance means he can hit even harder and tank even more. It also increases his defense by 5 points because of its a -5 attack debuff. It's very solid overall. No counter disrupt so you can hit staves and bypass stuff like flash. And because now that we have a share who grants resistance, you should be able to stack his res even more. You also have attack smoke, so if you want to tank more for mages and the like, you can always run that. And speed res solo, so you can double more naturally and have more resistance. Of course, not everything revolves around Aether Raids, and I wouldn't blame you if you didn't play Aether Raids. So we can move on to some player versus enemy builds. For the first build, we're going to be taking advantage of recoil damage. The first one taking into account Madness Flask, Fury 4, Moonbow, Desperation, Speed Smoke, and Flashing Blade 3. Madness Flask is basically just a Fury Tome, and with Fury 4 in the A, he can take 14 points of recoil damage, which is really good when you consider the fact that one standalone combat will knock him into the Desperation range. And because he's going to be going into the Desperation phase, you'll probably want something like a 2 cooldown special with something that accelerates it even more, which is why we have Flashing Blade in the Seal, and Speed Smoke in the C just so he can secure more doubles. It's basic, but it works very well. And then for his second build, we're going to be taking advantage of the brand new weapon Grunt Fox, as well as Swift Sparrow 3, Lull Speed Res, Res Smoke, and Speed Res Solo as his seal. This is just more so if you want to keep him in a healthier range. You can just increase his damage output by a great amount. Grunt Fox debuffing the foe for 4 on everything means he can essentially get a lot more bulk towards his res stat, so he can take on mages way better. Although if he goes up against distant counter melees, then he's probably going to be taking way more damage than he would prefer to. As such, you'll probably want to focus on mage killing more than anything else. However, a lot of melees also don't have the best resistance stat, so if you do find one that doesn't have distant counter, you should be able to double them and take care of them. Likewise, because Soren is relatively fast, he can bypass a lot of damage reduction stuff that isn't based on defense or anything else. And that's pretty much the gist of these two builds. They're basic, they work, you can't go wrong with either of them. And then finally we have 2 builds for Arena. The reason we're using him in Water Season is because it's full of blues, and it's probably where he's going to have the best time. Although, granted, you could really use him on any season. I just picked blue because of the second build, which we'll go into in a bit. But for now, let's just get into the first build. If you want to use him for scoring, I would suggest using him as a support unit rather than a combatant because of his preferred weapon. You have Wind's Brand with the Speed Refined, Ruptured Sky, Green Dual Infantry 4, Chill Speed, Joint Drive Attack, and Chill Defense 3. The reason I chose to run him as a support unit rather than a combatant is because I don't think he's able to take on as many threats as he would need to without dying to retaliation. So I figured the best thing to do is take advantage of his preferred weapon and then run him as a chill bot. Because his weapon is chill attack at base, and then owl at refine, but we don't need the owl, so I took speed. Gave him chill speed 3, that can also be interchanged, and then chill defense as a seal. You can really run any other two on his B and S because you only have chill attack in your weapon, so it's really flexible on depending on what you have available. Joint drive attack obviously for more scoring, and then green dual infantry because that's what you need to get the 180 BST. It's not necessarily the best. I would say it could come in handy even on like Arena Assault if you really want to run them there. However, if you don't want to run that, you could also run this Grunraven set on Arena Assault. Say hello to your, I guess, budget. I don't know if it's considered budget or your more premium Cecilia who performs worse. But anyway, we have Grunraven, Iceberg, Triangle Adept, Lancebreaker, Times Pulse, and Attack Defense solo. Triangle Adept and Lancebreaker are for the Dimitris. Triangle Adept is still there just in case we go up against Kroms. And Grunraven with Triangle Adept means you can take on Legendary Leafs, but because his attack is relatively high, I gave him Attack Defense solo as his seal, which can help bolster his measly 24 defense to 30 at the very least, so he can still take on hits. This is only recommended if you like Soren. I don't think you should use him for this set if you have a Cecilia because she has something that can just counter all these units anyway. So it's not as if he's going to be performing any better just because he's an infantry unit. But you still have access to Times Pulse, so if you do end up doubling something like a Dimitri, you can always hit him with an Iceberg. But yeah, 2 Arena Assault builds that you could probably make use of. I kind of prefer the first one mostly because he can be ran as a support unit. And I think it's way more potent than the second one, especially since Cecilia exists, and you don't have to invest as much into her because of her Triangle Adept Refine, her Raven preferred weapon, her range is really good. But yeah, that's about it for Soren. Soren is still an okay unit for the most part. I would say he's way more flexible now more than ever because of the amount of flowers he could get, as well as the fact that his base stat line isn't necessarily the worst. It's rather flexible and workable, all things considered. But yeah, let me know if you use anything else down below in the comments. I always want to hear what you have to say. Is there anything you necessarily agree on, disagree on? What other kinds of sets do you run on him? I'm curious. Let me know. And until next time, thanks for watching.